Hello, everyone, and welcome to our NSN Spotlight. If you haven't met me before, my name is Sam Duran, and I am Head of Delivery Services at New Schools Network. Today, we are very happy to be joined by Natalie Hanna, Head Teacher, Emma Cooper, Deputy Head, and Elisa Creaser, Assistant Principal at the Mendip School. So the Mendip School is a special all-through school that supports pupils with speech, language, and communication needs, as well as autistic spectrum disorder. The school opened in 2015. It is located in Somerset, and it is sponsored by the Bath and Mendip Partnership Trust. A few just general kind of formalities around the structure. So I will hand over soon to our colleagues at the Mendip School to kind of talk through what they do and how they personalize their curriculum to their students. But if you have any questions along the way, I will ask that you submit them to the chat box. If you can, there's a little chat box on the bottom of your screen that you will see. And then we will cover them at the end. As well, if you have any questions that you are curious about but don't want to ask publicly, you are more than welcome to send myself a private message on Zoom, and I will ask on your behalf. So without further ado, I will hand over to Natalie at school.
Good morning, everybody. It's nice to not see you because no one's got videos on. Welcome to our presentation. I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully this will work because we have tested it. Okay. So Sam, can you see that?
Yep, I can.
Perfect. Okay. So as Sam said, we're the Mendip School and we're an all-through school for pupils aged between 4 and 19 in Somerset. We opened in 2015. And we had 18 pupils on roll. I'm just going to try and move to my first slide, but it's not allowing that to happen. And will you go and press the slide out one? Sorry. Right down. Okay, hold on. Just bear with us. Sorry, 1 second. Is it because it's not full screen? Maybe. We did test this. You wouldn't know it, but we did. Okay. So we opened in September 2015 with 18 pupils and 11 staff, and we were on a temporary site at Fossway School. So in the beginning, we had a 3-classroom base that was at the end of Fossway building. Fossway is a generic special needs school, and they had at that point 200 pupils. So they were very gracious in allowing us the 3 classrooms that we had to be able to access. So you can see the early years classroom in these pictures, and there were 3 pupils, there were 2 adults, and those 2 doors were the length of the building, of the room. So it was very small spaces to start with. And the picture to the right, you can see us watching our temporary site being built throughout that first term that we were there. So it was all fenced off and we were very excited about being able to move into that temporary building. So the 3 classes were early years, Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3 class. And in the meantime, our site in Somerset on the Bath and West Showground was being built. And you can see from these pictures, the beginnings of what is the building that we are currently in. So in that first year, we did absolutely everything together. And you can see after the first term, we opened our temporary site. You can see work still being done there while we had our very official event being opened by governors and pupils and our principal at the time. We also did our first assembly, which is the bottom picture in the middle, in a classroom. And that was how we did it for the first year. We had all of the pupils and all of the staff in a classroom for assemblies. And on the right at the bottom, you can see that was our first whole school trip So all 18 pupils and all of the staff went to Air Hop in Bristol as our school trip. Top right is obviously our very first Christmas dinner in the hall that we had there. And top middle is our first residential, where we all went to laser tag and got very overexcited. And I think the point that I'm making with these pictures is that it was a really family atmosphere. There were 18 pupils that spanned from 4 up to a year 9. He was 14, and they did everything together in that first year. And it was an incredible experience and an incredible opportunity to get to know the pupils, to be able to tailor everything that we did to their needs. So everything in that first year was really small and really personal. And I remember the principal used to ask me all the time, how will this grow? How will this work when we have 120 pupils on site? And that was a really important question that she kept making me reflect on, because you can, when you have a class of 10 pupils, really focus everything down. So the things that we put in place to make sure that these small personal things were able to continue were, we had a really specific framework for learning in all subjects. And that enabled us to identify what the pupils needed to do next, where they were currently working, and indeed what they had missed from previous learning. It allowed every lesson to be based on the needs of each individual child. And then we took a really big risk in that first year, and we moved away from the traditional assessment methods for SEN, which previously had been B squared for us. And we looked at lots of different options. We looked at MAP, we looked at classroom manager, we looked at loads of different assessment systems, and we made a real jump to start with a new app, which lots of you may have heard of at this point, called Evidence for Learning. And that allowed us to take those really small, specific learning steps and collate the evidence that pupils were working on those skills. We also then used Class Notebook, which is a Microsoft tool, which enabled us to plan work either as a whole group in tasks like this one that you can see on the screen, or if you look down the left, you can see that each child had a specific area in which they were able to access learning at their level. And it meant that we were able to pitch at really individual level, we were able to assess at a really individual level, and we were able to evidence at a really individual level. In addition to that, we had schemes of work in place that enabled teachers to be able to look at an objective, think, yep, that's what the kids need to be doing next, and identify and pick out work that was appropriate to that skill development. And all of these things meant that when you have that diverse range of ages and needs in the class, you can still really personalize it down. We also did some work at this point with a range of schools through the whole education network in Sweden. And we picked up some skills around coaching and independent learning. And we enabled the pupils to be able to identify what it was that they wanted to learn next. And this in particular, these schemes of work made it easy for us to be able to say, yeah, fine, you want to develop that skill, then this is what you need to be doing. And it made that manageable and realistic. And it enabled the kids to have ownership of their learning at that point. The other thing that was really key at this point was that obviously with a school of 18, where you spend every day with all of the children, you know them really well. And we identified the power at this point of really key motivators for each individual child. So the child that you can see in this picture is deregulating or dysregulating, which one? Deregulating by drawing pictures from Five Nights at Freddy's. And this was sometimes an activity. This is not his classroom. He's gone into a different classroom to do this, but it was enabling them to make those choices at that point. And because we were small and because we all knew each other, it gave us that flexibility. And underpinning all of that was the expertise that we had brought across from Fossway, where myself and Emma used to work, and then other schools where other people joined us from. And we decided that these were our core essential skills that we were bringing into our new school. So you can see Thrive we bought into quite heavily, and we still strongly believe in Thrive as an approach. We have Autism Education Trust, which Emma is a trainer for, so all of our staff are able to develop those skills. A range of communication strategies and approaches, which we'll talk about later. Sounds Right, which is a phonics-based system, Numicon and Duke of Edinburgh for those independent older pupils, Teach as a strategy for autism, and our behaviour management, behaviour support, which we use ProAct, Skip. And again, we very much strongly believe in those. So those areas of expertise enabled us to have the flexibility to be more creative about aspects of our curriculum and our assessment, because those core values were in place. So it came to September 2016 and we were ready to move to our new building. Not quite ready, it wasn't quite ready as soon as we thought it would be, but just to give you a bit of a glimpse of the site, because you won't be able to come and see it. So this building was built for 120 pupils. Down the left-hand side, we have our primary corridor, and down the right-hand side, we have our secondary corridor. At the front of the school, we have meeting rooms and we have a cafe. And at the back of the school, you can see we have lots and lots of open areas. We have the Mugger, the multi-use games area, a golden mile track, and then at the back of that, there's a full-size football pitch, which at this point was fenced off so that pupils weren't able to destroy the grass before it was even embedded. And moving in 2016, we had 51 pupils and 24 staff. And we had to make some key decisions at this point. We had to think about, this was the first point we were going to start growing and having to really develop those systems that we'd started. And it brought a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunities along with it. So I'm going to talk about a few of those now. And the first opportunity that we grasped was the opportunity to have a school dog. And you can see in this picture that the children are delighted by it. And we made that decision because ultimately our pupils have a huge range of needs, and some of them really respond to animals within the school. At this point today, we have 4 school dogs. This one is still in practice, and we have 3 puppies who joined us this year. So we have Millie, and we have Heidi, and we have Luna, and this is Chica. So as we move forward to grow, we really had to think about what was it that were the core values and the core principles that our school was built on. And we really tried to refine this down. And over the years, this hasn't changed very much. Some of our staff are now 5 years into having this as part of their inset day in every September. And I know, I always think it must be incredibly boring for them because they live it every day and they know it inside out. But we made that decision because ultimately these are the things that make our school successful, make our school work, and make the kids happy and the staff really comfortable in the structures. So we always start with our morning routines when the kids come in. And I think we'll move on to speech and language in a minute, but visuals are a key part of everything we do. When we started this meeting today, we put up a visual sign on the door that says "Do not enter." And we're optimistic that that will work. It might. And reward time, we had quite a big discussion about this. So in our previous setting, our small setting, we had 20 minutes at the end of every day that pupils could work towards reward time. And most of the time they chose to be together and to play. They used to climb in the trees, they'd go to the reindeer lodge, they'd play on the bikes. And moving forward, those 18 pupils were really keen that that continue, because now they would be moving into different classes, into different spaces. And it was really important that they had the opportunity to spend that time with each other and continue to work on those relationships. So across the school still, every day, at the end of the day, if they have been doing their best in lessons, everybody gets reward time. Motivators. I mean, it's not rocket science. I'm sure you all are working with these, but if you can motivate the pupils, then they will want to learn to be able to achieve those motivators. And devices. So we had, as part of our independent learning, devices were absolutely key. There were people, individual pupils who brought in laptops from home to use to access their learning during the day. That was a really successful strategy for some of those pupils. And it was key that we continued to reflect and think about that. Speech and language. So as a speech language communication needs school, these were the key areas that we wanted to focus on. So I've put a picture of Jill on there so that you can see. She'd be delighted to know that she's part of this presentation, but she is our speech and language therapist who is employed full-time. We also have an additional speech and language therapist employed 3 days a week. And at this point, when we moved, we had a speech and language therapist employed 1 day a week. So speech and language was integrated into everything that we did. There were timetabled slots every day, and there were timetable slots for social skill development. Communication was absolutely key, and keeping those range of strategies that we talked about, and developing vocabulary. So vocabulary that's specific to autism or individual needs, but also vocabulary that develops those links and those word classes as pupils grow up. Oh, I've gone the wrong way, sorry. And again, really key building blocks, looking after each other. I cannot emphasize enough how that first year helped us all as a family to be together and to learn about each other and supporting each other. And moving forward, that was something that we were really quite desperate to keep hold of. You're supporting parents, making sure that they feel part of that team, and the well-being of staff. They are our most important, most valuable resource, and we really wanted to focus on being able to value them in the way that we were able to in that first year when we were small. And then expectations. Again, in that first year, so many of the pupils surprised us with what they were capable of in that nurturing small family environment. And we really wanted to make sure that every child who joined our school had the opportunity to show us what they were capable of on their best day. So as we moved, Fosway had previously been in a different local authority, and we moved into a neighbouring local authority, and some of the challenges around that were huge for us. So within the first couple of years, we received 17 directed placements from the local authority where we had felt unable to meet the needs of those children. Of those, only 2 are still with us and successful. And one of them will be a case study that Elise is going to talk to you about in a little while. There was no system in place for consultation. So the start of that year, 2016, was really tricky for us. The building was delayed by 2 weeks. So I remember we moved in over a weekend and we had to unwrap and assemble furniture to be ready for the Monday. And then on that Monday morning, we received notification that 12 pupils had been placed with us that we had consulted on 6 months previously. So our numbers had dramatically increased, and we were already taking a huge number of new pupils. And that left us significant challenges. Access to support services, it seemed a bit like trying to throw a dart over your head in the dark, trying to find out who does what within the local authority. You take for granted how much you know those things and how intrinsic they are to how effectively you can work as a leader in a school. And there were 100 acronyms that we didn't understand, and we would ask what it meant, and people would go, I don't really know. We've always just used that service for this, and we would ring that service and they would not be there. They'd moved somewhere else. It was a really tricky time, and there was a lack of equity. As a new free special school in a local authority that were not convinced that they needed a new free special school, there were services offered to the other special schools in that local authority that we did not have access to until maybe this year. About this year. And in addition to that, I love talking about this bit, it's one of my favourite bits, but we attended every group, every meeting, every single opportunity to try and integrate ourselves into everything that was happening in the local authority. And we were not welcome a lot of the time. We are now, and we work really effectively now with the local authority. We have some key people in key roles, and we've got a lot of effective multi-agency working going on now, but those initial challenges were huge. And systems, as I talked about before, when you start to develop systems, you have this idea of how they will grow and how they will develop. But actually, one of the key aspects is how they will embed when you are constantly adding staff into that system and pupils into that system. So we would have assessment systems and attendance systems and all of these things, and then you would be adding 30 pupils, and it doesn't reflect the embedding of the system. So in 2017, we had 85 pupils, and at the end of that year, we got our first Ofsted. And ideally, we had a 5-year plan to be full within 5 years, but actually by September 2018, we had 118 pupils, and we were pretty much full at that point. So the school was built for a capacity of 120. We also in 2018 developed our outreach provision, and we started reaching out to schools within a 10-mile radius to support other schools. In 2019, we increased our capacity to 144, which is the number of pupils that we can actually physically fit on the site. And we developed 2 additional provisions, one which was based on visiting young girls at home, and developing that autism approach for girls. Actually, they're teenage, young girls wasn't the right word. And then we also developed mainstream provision in one of our local secondary schools, where our pupils who are capable of significantly more GCSEs are able to attend and access the curriculum that they need, but with our staff supporting them being able to have the environment that they need at the same time. I've gone the wrong way again. I keep forgetting the buttons, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to pass you over to Emma, who's going to talk about the specifics of our curriculum.
So obviously, the lucky part of opening a new school is that you're able to put things in place right from the beginning without having to take on things that might have been in place for the last 10 years, and you're not having to worry about change and bringing people on board with that you're able to start right from the beginning exactly where you want to be. So as Nat mentioned before, we've got a really diverse range of children here with us. We have children who are working on historic P4, 5 levels, all the way up to children that are going to get higher level GCSEs. So we have a huge range of abilities throughout the school. But for all of those children, regardless of where they are, our aim is always that they will go on to leave us with a job or supported employment. And that's ultimately everything that we do has the view to that. And that's the most important part of what we're doing with our curriculum. And I think to do that, we looked really carefully, and we've already been through about 2 curriculum reviews since we started 5 years ago. But we've kind of got to a point now where we really feel like our curriculum is really personalised to the needs of our children. And so we have 4 aspects to that. So the first being our formal curriculum. So as Nat mentioned before, our formal curriculum is that every subject has a framework, and that framework is based on national curriculum, but it also has lots of things that we think are really important for our children to learn. And it's also been adapted so that we can recognise the small steps of achievement that our children are able to make, but also able to identify gaps in their learning and identify next steps. And our formal curriculum frameworks are very much embedded into our planning and assessment system, which Nat will talk about now. Not now, in a moment. So all of our children have some aspect of the formal curriculum in their day-to-day teaching. But we also have what we call our holistic curriculum. And for many of our children, this is the most important part of their time within the Mendip School. These are the things that make you smile. These are the things that our children talk about. These are the things that our children make them feel happy and safe and secure and enjoy being in our school. So Nat mentioned earlier how Thrive is really important to us as a school. We employ 1.5 full-time Thrive practitioners, and that's something that's very much embedded into our school system. That's about our emotion coaching, that's about zones of regulation, it's about our animals, as well as the dogs. We have our chickens. We use, as you'll have noticed from the pictures at the beginning, we have an amazing site. We're in the middle of nowhere, we can go on walks all the time. And that's a really important part of our learning, that it's practical, that it's outside, that we're experiencing the weather, that we're experiencing all the things of the natural environment that we're so lucky to have here with us. We very much focus on enrichment, so going out on trips and experiences and local community access, going to the supermarket and the library. All of those things are a part of our holistic curriculum, and also the sensory support that we put in place for our children. We also have another part of our curriculum which is called characteristics of effective learning, and we've taken these from the engagement profile, and they're very much about the key skills our children need to have in order to move on to be able to get that job they need, to be able to be independent, to be able to be resilient. And these things are so important to everything we do every day within our school. And they embed their way through all of our curriculum. And we also have what we call core non-negotiables. So these aren't things that the children do so much, but the things that we provide that are fully embedded throughout our day-to-day teaching and learning that help support our children. And that's the things we've talked about already: the Perrett Skip, our behaviour support model, our structures, our predictability, our routines, our visuals, our staff's knowledge and skills weave their way all through everything that we do every day. And then with those 4 areas, we personalise them to make them individual for the children that we need. So we have what we would like to call our ready to learn group, and they're kind of in 2 areas. So Nat's already mentioned our provision up at our local secondary school. So our most able children who are going to be able to go on to do a wider range of GCSEs will have a larger part of that triangle. So they will have a lot more of the formal curriculum, because that's where their flight paths and our knowledge of their learning tells us they need in order to achieve what they want to do, whether that's going to college or university, whatever it is. They need that bigger chunk of formal curriculum to enable them to do what they want to do. But embedded into that formal curriculum will be their holistic learning. So they will still have access to therapies and Thrive and the trips, but with a big focus on their formal learning as well. Then we have our learning to learn children, or our nurture cohort. These are children who might potentially be quite academically able, however their SEN or their behaviour or their deregulation in terms of their emotions mean that they are not yet in a place where they are able to access that formal curriculum to be able to learn as we hope and think they will probably be able to at some point. So they have a much more holistic part of their curriculum with formal embedded into that. They still have those core learning objectives and those non-negotiables embedded throughout, but much more of a focus on emotional regulation and getting them ready to be in a place where they are able to learn at a later point. And as we've said and we'll keep saying, is that we feel very strongly that children who feel happy and who feel safe will learn, and that's what we do with that nurture cohort. And then we have our learning for life children, or our life skills group. So these might be our children who are more autistic or non-verbal, and they need a different type of curriculum than the other 2 type of children I've mentioned before. So they need a much broader range of holistic. So they need a lot more community access, life skills teaching, real practical learning for life activities. So most of their day will be spent engaging in that holistic curriculum, and their formal aspect of English, maths and science, for example, will be fully embedded into the practical, day-to-day, engaging activities that children will be working on in class. And the characteristics of effective learning and the core non-negotiables are thicker bands in there, if you notice the arrows. And that's because those visual structures, routines and predictability are even more important for those children, as are them learning the skills of motivation and persistence and curiosity. I think what's important to say, however, that no children are in one of those areas on a necessarily fixed basis. They might be in them on one day, but not in another. They might be in a place where they're working on a formal curriculum and then something happens and they need more holistic. And we're very fluid with the way we work with our children to ensure they get what they need on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a yearly basis, with a view to that ultimate game of them going on to wherever they feel they need to be. And that links seamlessly into our assessment.
Okay, so that's an awful lot of personalisation of curriculum. How do we assess that? And I think one of the key things is that decision that we made early on about evidence for learning. So we chose this because it's a clear link between teaching and assessment. Everything that happens in the classroom, everything that happens outdoors on those walks, or when they're out with the animals, all of those skills, all of those demonstrative abilities are able to be assessed and it's evidence-based. So you can capture pictures of whatever the pupils are doing, and you can assign specific and very directed learning objectives to those if they're academic, but also in much broader senses, you can attach elements of the Thrive that you're working on, or AET sometimes.
Yeah.
All the different aspects can be linked to what it is that you've seen that child do on that day, or how they have developed that skill. It then compiles all of that evidence together in a really neat, tidy little way that allows you to see what progress the young people are making, and to be able to share that with parents and be able to produce beautiful learning journeys that go home at the end of every big term that demonstrate to parents what the pupils are doing within school. And this was, again, a really key thing for parents. They often feel like they don't know what it is that their young people do during the day. And one of the things we really wanted to focus on was being able to align our expectations of where these young people can move on to with what their parents see them being able to do at home. And sometimes that's really different. So having an evidence-based support tool that was able to show this was really important to us. We then also use these for progress discussions with staff, where we will talk about flight paths, which I'll show you in a minute, and the levels that we expect the pupils to be able to achieve by the time they get to post-16 with us. We use these for learning walks, so you can add evidence in of what you see on the learning walks as you go around, but you can also discuss any improvements or any suggestions that you've made in terms of the evidence that you're seeing produced actually in the classroom live. And one of the key aspects of it is that actually, when you have discussions with staff based on using this assessment method and this really live assessment method, they're often telling you what it is that they need to be improving. So they will say, actually, I can see there's no evidence of me working on science. I've done loads of science, but there's no evidence of it. Or actually, I need to do more science. It's not always science, but but it's a really powerful tool. And one of the things that we found year on year on year was that it improved quality of teaching across the school, just by being evidence-based and by being so specific. There is no alternative assessment method that we use. This is how we assess. And we as an SLT then bring it back together and look at it and analyse the information that it gives us. So we have developed flight paths for every child, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute. But we have identified that most of our pupils will be working on one of these key qualification paths. So this is for the ones who are working on qualification paths, not necessarily our life skills, although a lot of our life skills pupils will be accessing a qualifications path in one of these areas, and you can see that in one of the lines there. So we have a flight path for age-related expectations, a flight path for our upper GCSE pupils, a flight path for our lower GCSE pupils, and then entry-level 3, 2, and 1 flight paths. And of those flight paths, we are able to use evidence for learning to identify where the pupils are currently working, what it is demonstrating their ability to be able to do, and we tie that in with other summative assessments that reinforce that. And then we're able to identify which of those qualification paths we believe they are currently online to achieve. Again, this is a very reflective and fluid process. So just because we identify at this point that a child is working on an entry-level 3 qualification doesn't mean that they cannot move up to a GCSE qualification, or that actually something might happen that moves them down onto an entry-level 2 flight path qualification. But it really is all about the discussion around that. So it enables us to look at, so this is for our reception pupils and our year 1 pupils, and you can see that we're able to identify which flight path they are currently learning on, whether that has exceeded the flight path they were on previously, whether it has maintained the flight path they were on previously, or whether actually they're dipping off their flight paths and we need to look at some interventions to put in place there. And you can see how really personalised and bespoke our assessment is in this area. You can see that we're able to identify not only the child and the flight path, but also the subject. And we're able to look at actually what can we do for that one child with all of those tools within our curriculum that will support them in being able to achieve the outcomes that they want to achieve at the end of their time with us. So Elise is going to talk to you about a specific example of how all of those things have tied in to personalisation.
Thank you.
Down.
So Jacob was a young man who was a directed placement for us in 2018. He was in year 4 when he came to us. He coped relatively well in his first year with us, made steady progress with us, slightly slow, maybe not as rapid as we would like, but was progressing through year 4. He struggled with moving groups into year 5, and he has a diagnosis of autism, and he's highly anxious and really hypervigilant. So going into year 5, Jacob demonstrated increasingly challenging behaviours, lots of verbal abuse and physical abuse towards staff and to students. He didn't contain these behaviours just to his class, so we saw school-wide disruption with him targeting younger and more vulnerable students. So we put in a lot of strategies in place, and I'll just talk to you about those. They're not particularly in the order in which we put them in place. So he had a bespoke timetable, which was initially broken down into 20-minute slots and working with SLT in those timeframes. And we were really clear with him in those that he had visuals about what was expected of him in each of those slots. Sort of over about an 8-week period it took in the end, we gradually reintroduced him into class, with him looking at which lessons he could potentially access within that class group, or which ones he needed to stay with SLT in a safer space for him. We put in sensory diet breaks and timetabled those in, looking at key areas in the day where those would be important to him. So after lunch, before break time at the end of the day, we did some behavioural analysis, and we used behaviour tracking sheets to try and pinpoint when behaviours were occurring, what particular types of behaviours were occurring, and what needs he was trying to get met with those behaviours. We had meetings with parents, which have over time become increasingly more positive and open and honest discussions, which is really great. We had daily contact with parents using our communication tool, which is Class Dojo, and we used the method of 2 stars and a wish, so 2 things that he'd done really positively that day and something to work on. So it was a really clear structure for us to communicate with parents. We used and suggested strategies that parents could use at home that we used in school, so there was an overlap there of the strategies being used both at home and at school, and we included things like social stories and visuals with those. We also put a time limit, or suggested a time limit for parents for talking about school, because he was really anxious about school when he was at home, and parents were spending a lot of time unpicking the day, role-playing scenarios, helping him work out how to do that better. So we suggested a 15-minute conversation about school, and then talking about school was finished, so he could then enjoy the rest of his evening and hopefully reduce his anxieties a bit. When Jacob was in a higher state of arousal, we used a common language when responding to him. So, for example, it's okay to feel angry, but it's not okay to hurt your adults. You can choose classroom or group room. And I think that common language and a script, if you like, was really supportive for him. He had a really clear and bespoke reward system in place. So at the time, his class were using tokens, that they were represented a certain amount of time. So it was really clear to Jacob that each token that he earned was worth 5 minutes of his reward time. We did a Thrive assessment, and he had 1-to-1 sessions weekly, which are still ongoing. He always had adult time available to him every day. And a key one for us was to give him 1-to-1 support at unstructured times. So play times, break times, and as well in that reward time at the end of the day. The impact that has had has been really, really significant. He is far more able now to use language to convey his emotions rather than these big physical and loud outbursts. He will access the strategies in place for him more regularly now, most notably the sensory input. We recognised that he responded really well to deep pressure and to bouncing on a ball, and he's far more able now to access that, still with direction, but he will go with it rather than buck against that. He's also becoming more aware of his own responsibilities with the way in which he manages his emotions. This time last year, nothing was Jacob's fault, and he was really struggling to accept any responsibility for his actions in response to his emotions. And we can see that that's something that he's really developing now, which is wonderful to be able to talk through with him his responsibility in that. And you can see on his flight paths here that he made sort of gradual progress in his first year with us. And then when it gets to the end of year 4, you can see between year 4 and year 5, there's a significant dip in his academic progress, obviously compounded by the lockdown situation as well. But what's really pleasing to see is at the end of year 5, they're going into year 6, where we are now, that there's been a massive rise in his academic progress already. So, you know, we're really hoping that that will continue for him, and with all those strategies still in place and some fading out, obviously. Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we thought it was really key that we show you a couple of those flight paths and tell you about the pupils behind them, because this is all about personalisation. And for us, interactions with the pupils, the curriculum, the assessment, the strategies we use are all really, really personal. They're personal for us and they're personal for the young people. So I wanted to tell you an example of my story, which is about a young man who joined us in 2017. He was PECs from 2 schools prior to coming to us. And in his first couple of terms with us, you can see he used to leave me these lovely notes, which were what I like to call blackmail notes around access to certain things on the computers or particular games he wanted to play. He would also then obviously switch my computer screen sideways so that I couldn't turn it back. I know it's important to remember these things. He would, every lesson, he would tell me I was terrible and I was stupid and I was horrible and I couldn't teach him because I wasn't clever enough to teach him. And while that might be accurate, it's not relevant in this particular situation. But you can see that the ceiling tiles, one day all of these were down and broken in the quiet room. And there were many, many, many different occasions I could tell you about. There was one day that all the wooden spoons were stuck in the ceiling in the food tech room. There was the week that I lost my memory stick and I was really cross with the TA about it, and then found it in my printer because that's where he'd hidden it. There was the day that he changed my computer to Russian, and I couldn't access anything, and I was completely unable to do anything, and also IT couldn't change it back. But I think possibly my favourite was the day that he programmed the phone line so that anytime I rang anybody, it said that death was calling. And I think it's important just to reflect on these moments and look at actually what does the assessment and the evidence that we gathered about this young person show us about those behaviours, those experiences, those challenges. And what you can see from the flight paths, we've got our age-related, our higher GCSE and our lower GCSE, and you can see that for a long time, he was unable to access learning in our school. And then all of a sudden, he was able to show us what he was truly capable of. And that is because of the academic curriculum being in place to support that high level GCSE, but also that holistic curriculum being in place to make sure that we're constantly addressing the fact that we speak to the young people in the same way and we use the same approaches all the time. And I just wanted to share with you that actually there is a time to just focus and think about what it is that we do it for, because having the opportunity to open a free school, I think, has been the biggest privilege of my life. You can give something, you can do it in the way that you want to do it, and you're not tied to any old methods or old approaches. And ultimately, the outcomes that you get can be just truly incredible. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you very much. That was really insightful. And
I can't hear you, Sam. I'll just check. Is it not just me?
Can anyone else at NSN, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Sam.
There.
Oh, yeah, we can hear you
Is that
now.
better? Cool. I was just saying, thank you very much. That was really insightful. It's clear you have put a lot of thought, energy, and effort into your curriculum, but also appreciate, and I'm sure many people here have similar stories of individual pupils and their paths as well. I actually have a number of questions that were sent to me privately, but there is one at the larger group. So if you don't mind taking on some questions. So the program that you use to assess the children, that is evidence for learning, correct?
Yeah.
So do you think that that would be able to be implemented in a mainstream school that had children with special educational needs?
Yes, absolutely. That's something that we have. When we worked at Fosway, we had a network of 27 local primary schools that we supported with SEN, and many of those used evidence for learning for that specific purpose. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And also, if anyone else has any other questions they'd like to ask, please do pop them in the chat, but I have a few more. So I think a lot of people could be wondering, but the experience of your first Ofsted inspection, can you talk a little bit about what that was like, and if you have any advice that you would give to any other special free schools who are approaching that for the first time?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was a really positive experience in lots of ways. I think we were very, very sure that we were an outstanding special school, and the key area that for us meant that we weren't an outstanding special school was that ability to embed after 3 years with things changing all the time. So I think my advice to people would be, look at your systems and make sure that you're able to align and demonstrate that they are clearly embedded over time. And that is a challenge. That is such a huge challenge, because you're having to bring in different groups of pupils all the time. But if you can demonstrate that with that core group of pupils that you started with, that you have used the same processes, the same systems, and the impact of those things, it will make a huge difference. And we were recognised as a very good special school. So it was not a negative experience, but I think it's really hard when you feel, I think you've probably seen today, we feel really passionately about the choices and the risks that we took for our school.
Yeah.
And we feel really passionately that we do the right things for the right reasons. So for us, it was hard. And it was also the very end of that third year. We were 2 weeks before the holiday. Everybody was exhausted. We'd had a Key Stage 2 residential. And I think we found it hard to reconcile that what we saw every day wasn't as clear as we thought it was.
That makes sense. And another question, what is your philosophy towards exclusion? One of the members in the event is opening an AP and are curious about using an approach that doesn't use behavioralist principles of rewards and sanctions.
Interesting, very interesting. We will use exclusions if we have to, in very, very clearly defined circumstances. So, for example, we have used one permanent exclusion, which was a young lady who was a directed placement through tribunal. And the reason that we made that decision is because of the location of our site. We are close to a really busy main road, and 3-4 times she would go over the fence and down to the road, and we would have to stop traffic and we would have to call the police to change that. We never felt able to meet her needs, and that was a key for us in, I think, reconciling that decision of APEX. But we could not keep her safe, and because of the nature of our pupils, they were seeing that behaviour and beginning to copy that behaviour. So we had to make that choice for her. Actually, I think it's worked out well for her. She's now at a residential setting where she needs to be, and it has made a massive impact on the family who were struggling at the time as well. Fixed term exclusions, we will use in an absolute last kind of, we've got one line, and the line is, you can be in crisis and staff can get hurt, but you cannot make a choice to physically hurt one of your adults in the school. And that's our line. And the young man that Elisa talked about, there are occasions that we have to use fixed term exclusions with him. We would prefer internal, but we will do external if it's absolutely necessary. But I think that the way that we see it is that it's a tool as anything else that we have. Rewards, motivators, sanctions, all of those holistic approaches. everything we have is a tool, and I don't think you can ever say never, because sometimes those choices are difficult for you as an adult who doesn't want to take those approaches, but might actually be in the best interests of the child. So it is always that best interest kind of philosophy for us.
And then another question. I know we said before this that we didn't, that this is finally an opportunity to not talk about COVID, but it of course has to come up at least once. But is there any changes that you've made as a result of kind of the COVID shutdowns and lockdowns that you're actually going to keep as you move forward?
Oh, that's an interesting
Well,
one.
we've kept our exits and entrances at the beginning and the end of the day. So our kind of strategies in terms of when children come into school in the mornings and when they leave at the end of the day. When we were in our very tight bubbles, we were asking class teams to take the children to the buses and to the parental cars, and we ended up using 2 different exits rather than one, calling the children from their classrooms rather than what we used to have was bus rooms where all the children on the same buses would go to a particular room, and that's something that we think we'll keep because the children, the communication with the parents, knowing where that child is right at the end of the day, it's been really helpful, I think, strategically, that one.
Yeah, loads better.
And another question from the group, what training and induction do you give to new staff?
So we have quite a bespoke package to start with that all staff will receive very shortly after starting. So staff will receive at least 1 day's PRAT skip training, which is our behaviour support training, and that's absolutely integral to everything we do every single day. We also do obviously all the statutory, the safeguarding and those sorts of things. We also make sure everyone has at least Autism Education Trust level 1 training, if not more. What else do we do?
We always do our non-negotiables.
Non-negotiables. So at the beginning of the year, we have a same-ish presentation every year, which is about our non-negotiables, curriculum, expectations, high expectations. But throughout the year, we put on a lot of training in terms of emotion coaching, zones of regulation. I'll do things about autism and girls. We do things about teach. We do cognitive theories of autism. So we have an awful lot going on all the time on a rotation throughout the year. And I think the key part of that is all of our teaching assistants do all of the training exactly the same as a teacher. There's nothing that just teachers do in our school, and that's really important. And we also include our support site staff, our office team, our kitchen team, and all of our behaviour support, because they're going to come into contact with children just as much, not just as much, but often throughout the year. So we have a really high level of training for all of our staff, and I think that's something that people who are new to the Mendip School really value, because ultimately we have a lot of younger staff that have come from university that come to us, and I think we often give them a lot of tools and they want to then move on, and that's okay, because they want to go on and do their teacher training and stuff, because we've given them such a good start.
That's great. And then how much involvement, a question kind of more on the pre-opening side, how much involvement did you have in the new build? And is there anything you would change in the build or layout of your school?
We have talked about this a few times, I think. So we were fully involved in the design, and every aspect of it was our choice. It's designed for autism, and if you walk around the school, you'll see that there's lovely clear walls and open, like this one, just like this one. And open corridors, really wide open corridors. We have talked in the past about whether or not, because we're in a square, as you saw on that picture, when we have behaviours that challenge, like the ones that Elisa was talking about, they can impact across a large portion of the school. And when we visit other schools, you can see doors on keypads and different aspects. We have talked about that, but actually we think that's one of the strengths of the school, and we manage the disruption. But the pupils, we want them to be independent, and we want them to develop those senses of responsibility, and actually the impact they have on people around them is a huge part of that. Is there anything else we'd change?
I think I would have ensured that the primary outdoor areas had the resources in that you needed in the outside spaces to start with, rather than later on, just right from the beginning.
We had to sacrifice a sensory room in the budgeting process. So we got soft play.
Yeah.
And we might have made a different choice now, I think. I think sensory would be more valuable than soft play, potentially. Although we'd like both.
Yeah.
We want both.
We'll get both.
We'll get both.
Really. I think we have someone who wants to ask a question, but Lisa, did you want to go ahead and ask your question? I can hear you. Not sure if we can hear you, so I will ask one that's been put in the chat. As the number of young people on roll increased, did you see any issues with regards to the sensory sensitivities of the students?
That's interesting. I think because it was gradual, in many ways the children got used to it gradually. I think we feel it more now that we're full, and we have, the building was built for 120, we've got 144, but I think we manage it very well in terms of, it's part of those key non-negotiables that we talk about at the beginning of every year. It's about the low arousal classrooms, the no clutter, the, you know, and I think that's our responsibility as well, that if we go around and notice someone's getting a bit messy or too many things up, that's part of our responsibility to remind people of that as well.
And we still have our numbers,
We still have our numbers, and I think, yeah, I don't, it's not something, it's a good question because it's not something I've thought about in a specific way, but I think our children do manage their sensory sensitivities really well here. And actually what we notice is many of our children have come from a mainstream environment. So actually when they come into our environment, it's the opposite. It's the, because they've been in a really busy mainstream classroom. Actually coming here, it's the opposite, that they feel much more calm rather than they're hyperstimulated.
I think that's a challenge that we are currently facing is we have 6 pupils currently at tribunal who want places within the school, and we're adamant that 144 is our limit because those groups of 10 in primary and 12 in secondary, we're not prepared to exceed that. So it's still very, very, it's the right numbers still. Yeah.
Absolutely. Lisa has asked her question. So she works in a free school and they always see commissioning in terms of filling places. You mentioned failing places. How should we change our bidding process to reflect the need for the right places?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure I understand the question because all the different local authorities work slightly differently on commissioning. So for us, it took a while for all of our places to be commissioned. So by the time we were already full, by the time the local authority that we sit within requested the 120 places or 144 places we had available. I think what we found was growing by 30 at the start of a year is quite a lot. I think maybe try and commission your spaces for the year ahead with a view to having maybe 3 entry points, getting a group of 12 settled and then moving on to another group of 12 and then perhaps another group of 12. But it depends on the kind of school, the needs of the kids, the age of the kids. So there would be a lot of factors depending on that. Our growth was quite quick in comparison to what we had planned. But other than that one point at the start of 2016, I think it was manageable. Also overstaff. We overstaffed every year on our recruitment for September so that we had that flexibility to move halfway through the year to move into an additional classroom if we needed to and split the groups just so that it meant the needs were more defined. Happy to talk about it more in terms of specifics if you want to, Lisa, because I know it's quite it's a tricky one to advise.
It's been relationship building with a local authority, isn't it? I think when nobody knows anybody, they're just sending you consultations, you're reading them and you're all of those things, and there's no real face to it. And I think relationship building has been really key in being able to have those honest conversations with people about what we think we can and can't do.
Yeah.
Ashley, sorry, we're attempting to have people unmute and ask questions. Not sure if it's working the whole time. Ashley, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, please. Just thank you guys for your presentation. It's been really interesting to hear your experiences. The question I had was with regards to sort of the work you do with parents and around supporting the parents as well. So if you can give me a couple of bits more information about what you do.
Do you want me to do it? Yeah. Okay. So I think we've always done parental training, and a lot of the packages that we offer to staff, we have offered to parents. And we do an outreach support as well, which allows us to kind of offer those behaviour support strategies at a reduced level. We've appointed a PFSA so that they can go out and work in home. We have some of our staff who currently visit home to do some work in the mornings to get the young people in if they're reluctant to come in. We do lots and lots of different things. Friends of Mendip School, FOM, they do a lot of work around trying to kind of unite the community of parents, because our parents can feel really isolated a lot of the time. We have parents in 5 different counties where their pupils attend our school, so it's trying to link them up. They tend to do a family fun day, usually, not this year, in October, which enables all the new parents to come along and meet all of the current parents and experience the school community. Class Dojo, I think, also really helps. So we have Class Dojo, which allows us to talk to the whole school parents, or to split that into groups or individual classes. But it also means that the parents see anything that's posted on the class story, which has all of the kids in, and they get to know each other, and they can talk to each other, and they develop those bonds and that community through their classes. We're looking at moving forward, doing something more informal for parents, but we're really only just thinking about that at this point.
And I think evidence for learning as well, in terms of being able to send home those journeys, that parents are fully able to physically see what their children have been doing rather than just conversations. And I think that's sometimes useful, isn't it, having it in a visual way as well as verbal.
Yeah, and the flight paths, because we want to be able to visually demonstrate to parents what it is that we're aiming for with their young people academically. And we always find that that's a really difficult thing for parents to relate to. And often parents will just say, we just want them to be happy. And we want that too. But then you get to post-16 age, and actually a choice has to be made at that point. And often families aren't ready for that. So the flight paths give us a really clear way to discuss that with parents.
Great, thank you so much. That is unfortunately everything that we have time for today. I'm sure we could ask you a million questions, but just want to say a very, very big thank you to Natalie, Emma, and Elisa for putting this together for everyone's benefit, and for speaking through their school and answering the questions. So a huge thank you to the Mendip School, and hopefully we'll be able to come visit in the new year. But thank you everyone very much for your time. As always, if you have any questions or anything that you'd like to follow up on, please do email our events account, and we would be happy to help. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks.
Thanks very much for
Bye.
hosting.